This episode is brought to you in part by our Patreon subscribers Laura Kitchings, Karen Cox, and Michael Haddam. If you would like to help support Historians at the Movies podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/historians at the movies. Hey everybody, welcome back to Historians at the Movies podcast. I'm your host and creator, Jason Herbert, and every single week we are bringing you movies and the histories behind them. And this week, we're talking about Any Given Sunday from 1999, starring Al Pacino and Jamie Foxx. And I brought on an amazing scholar, a friend of mine, a guy I've been following on Twitter for years. He's Lou Moore. He's a professor at Grand Valley State, and he just released a book this week called The Great Black Hope, Doug Williams, Vince Evans, and the Making of the Black Quarterback. And Lou and I have the most amazing conversation talking about the challenges that African-American quarterbacks faced as they came through the system into the NFL over the last several decades. We talk about the challenges African-American quarterbacks have today, how representation on film affects the way we look at sports, and so many more other things. So I hope you enjoy this podcast. I had a blast. It's a lot of fun. So sit back and relax because Any Given Sunday kicks off next. All right, Lou Moore, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Dude, so I wrote about this last night. I was talking about the week that was to come and stuff like that. And I was like, I got Lou Moore coming on the pod. I've been trying to get you on the pod for the longest time. I've been trying to figure out a way because I know you're super busy. I see you posting, I see you writing, you're teaching, stuff like that. And I have been wanting to talk to you. This is our first actual conversation,
right.
ever. And I was so excited about this. I was saying, oh, because if I got this guy coming on, he's a friend of mine, never had a chance to. So I'm excited, man. Thank you so much for being here. And you've got a book to talk about today. We got a book and a movie.
We got a book to talk about. Look at it.
We can talk about all your books, actually, man. Because you got three of them. I've got two of which.
Yeah, so pretty exciting. And then I did do the guest Historians at the Movie when you guys were still on Twitter for Harlem Nights, and I think one of the Rockies. And that was super fun. The Harlem Nights one was super fun. We've got a lot of people on that.
Dude, yeah, that movie was a lot of fun. We need to do that one on the pod at some point in time. It's part of the reason why I like the pod, because we're not beholden to what's available on social, on and I was saying this over the weekend, sometimes I get frustrated because the diversity of films that I want to show are not always available. Because the reason why we started on Netflix and then it went to go to Prime and then Disney Plus just so we could show more stuff, know?
Right. Any Given Sunday is not on anything. But luckily it was a $4 purchase. So I was like, all right, cool.
I should make the investment on this one. And when I saw your book was coming, of course I saw you were talking about writing this book for a while. So I get to kind of see this book in progression and stuff. And I kept thinking, okay, this might be a good thing to get on. So, and there are a couple movies we could have done, but this one felt right to talk about. And it kind of feels like it lined up really well with the book. So.
Yeah, no, it does. When I was watching it the other day, I was like, oh yeah, this is, I mean, it's not my characters, and we can get into that later, aren't Willie Beeman. They're not as out there as Willie Beeman, but the stuff he had to go through, the stuff he was talking about, I was like, oh yeah, this is spot on. This is oh my gosh, I haven't read my book. No, I'm like, this is the first early chapters are kind of explaining what these guys went through. It's Willie Beeman explaining his life, but it's me explaining it with actual facts and kind of primary sources and the guys who had to go through it. So
yeah, absolutely. All right. But before we jump into your book, before we jump into this movie, I want to jump into you, Lou. You want to introduce yourself and talk about what you do and so forth?
Yeah, it's Lou Moore. Oh my gosh, I'm at Grand Valley State. I've been here since 2008, and I will call myself a sports historian. And one of the questions I always get asked is how do you get into that? And so I'm sure you get a lot of younger scholars or college students that watch this. And I was in undergrad, senior year at Cal State Sacramento University, and we were doing a California history project. And I was trying to find a project, right? We had to write, back then students had to write. So we had to write like 20-page paper.
What?
Yeah, that's crazy.
You did the reading too?
Yeah, there was a lot of reading, and it wasn't like study guides. There's no AIs to help. You had to do everything yourself. And I wanted to do something sports, because that's what I liked. And that's like, if I'm going to do it for 16 weeks or however long a semester is, I wanted to be engaged in it. And I wound up writing on the Jack Johnson, Jim Jeffries fight. Now, it doesn't wind up happening in California. It's in Reno, Nevada. But the majority of it takes place, like the signing, the build up is California, because it's supposed to be in Emeryville, which is like right by San Francisco. And then California bans boxing right before, like a month before the fight. And so that was like the senior thesis. I parlayed that into like the master's program there. And then I eventually worked on that and got into the PhD program at UC Davis, and just really fought to always do sports history when I was doing classes. Like if I could get away with it. Sometimes you just can't get away with it because, people don't do sports, and people don't see it as real. And then I got lucky to get this job here where there's sports history classes. And so I've just kind of made it my home.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I was thinking about that as I was kind of doing the prep work and so forth. Like we'll talk about this, about, the guys in your book and also Willie Beeman and so forth in this movie. But there's so much of this is being shaped by like outside perceptions about who these people are, right, and what they're capable of and stuff like that. And I wonder if like you had, like, as you were coming up as a scholar, people were like, it's like, you can't do sports history because it's not important. Or it's like it's not like these like, it's not intellectual history, it's not labor history, it's not gender history, whatever, right? Of course, sports history incorporates all that kind of stuff, right? But were you finding yourself as a scholar as you were coming up, really trying to justify like what it was you did inside the field and say, wait, sports history matters,
right? That's
because sports matters to people.
No, I think you're exactly right. And the way I like to see it is like, I tell the story of Black history via the Black athlete, and I tell a story of American history via the Black athlete. So if we go to the progression of my books, shameless plug, I Fight for a Living is a boxing book, but it's really about like working class, if you want to call them working class, Black manhood, late 1800s, early 1900s. And if you think about it, we don't hear from the Black working class at that time, right? They're not writing, they're not in the newspapers. It's really the middle class. And so this is a way to understand what some of these men were doing as like betting wise, or just why would you even fight, and then what that meant to them, the money they can make and stuff like that. And the next book, We Will Win the Day, is about the civil rights movement, but it's through the story of the Black athlete, how they saw themselves, how the Black press saw them, how white America saw them. And so that's what I want to do. And to be able to do that, you have to battle, right? You have to sell this idea that this is important. What you realize though, is that when you get in the classroom, it's important because you get butts in the seat, right? And numbers count. And the college world, numbers count, right? So a class about maybe politics, like 19th century politics, they're not going to make, but a class about sports history will always make, especially now when we're just kind of serving general eds. I don't want to go too much on higher ed.
No,
but it makes, and it's allowed me to really kind of be myself and carve out a little niche. And then, when you add social media to it, I know Twitter has changed over the last dozen years, but when I got on, early on, there's not a lot of academics, and so me being at a little kind of regional teaching school was able to carve a space out where, I'm not at a R1 institution. I don't have R1 funding. I don't have R1 time, but I'm able to kind of be seen as like one, I wouldn't say I'm the top sports historian, but I'm known just because of my activity, as you said, on social media. And that's helped a lot, right? Because now all of a sudden there are like journalists who want to speak to you, right? And they recognize what you do has worth and value.
Yeah, and I found you. I guess I seem to recall, like, I remember coming across you on social media, years ago, whenever it was, back when we were young, because I think we're about the same age. And I was like, this guy's doing something cool and different. And like, you really, I don't know that I ever talked to you about this, but like, when I was teaching high school, as I was writing my dissertation, you were so influential in the ways that I approached my students. I started with the lecture every single year. The first lecture I gave, first day of class, was an image of Colin Kaepernick,
Oh wow. Yeah.
kneeling. And so much that, Lou, I never talked to you about this, was like pushed by stuff that I saw you talking about, right? I'm like,
Oh.
why? Here's a guy doing this thing. I'm sure we'll talk about Colin a little bit later on, right? But I was like, and that's what social media could be, right? It's like these great emphasis. It's like, hey, look at this, And I wonder, do you find that your students who come to your sports history courses are athletes more relatable than, say, a George Washington or a JFK, or is it easier to find some level of like commonality with students? Like, are students remarking on why they're interested, like in sports histories themselves?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So the majority of my students are actually sports management majors, and
Oh,
one of
cool.
my classes is kind of in their not in their requirements, but you could take it as an elective. And I think they're like, yeah, I'd rather take this than like sport business class or whatever, right?
Sure.
But the way you get them is just to be like, look, we're gonna have these real conversations, and you could do that. Like I could talk about Muscular Christianity and Tim Tebow, and although it's been a long time since he was relevant, the students still remember it. But you can also use sports in your general history class, kind of like you were suggesting with your high school students, right? So my survey, second half, which now we should probably have three, not halves, obviously, but three.
Oh, absolutely.
Three-thirds of a survey. It's just too much history to be able to get through. But it's like, okay, I could include like John L. Sullivan, who's, Irish American heavyweight champion from, I want to say 1882 to 1890, and talk about working class Irish, and then also Americanization and manhood. Or I could have a conversation about Barney Ross, who was a Jewish American fighter in the 1930s, as a way to introduce some stuff that Jewish Americans were going through, right? Or Joe DiMaggio, or Joe Louis in World War II, or Jackie Robinson. And so you can't, in a general history class, you can't do all sports, but you could like kind of fit that in, and the students who understand sports get it. But you can also do that with music and stuff. So a lot of pop history. But also, I don't want to talk too much, but the other thing is the beauty of what you said about like social media is that we were able to curate what we wanted to do. And one of the things I was doing early on was a lot of primary sources, right? Like we have access as historians. I always tell people like, the social media is like an extended classroom, right? I know I tweet a lot of like live sports takes because that's where it's at now. Like I think it's just easier and fun to do that because you've created a community, and I like that aspect of it. But then I really like, sharing those primary sources when I was doing that. So a lot of times when I was researching, I was getting editorial pages, front pages, just randomly, right? Because it doesn't take much to PDF that. And then the whole sports page, making notes of it. And then sometimes I'll post stuff like that. I don't do it as much, but it's always fun and then you learn that people really like history. They really like primary sources, right? Because it cuts through a lot of the BS that they see.
Yeah. Well, there's also, I think, Lou, there's a way you present stuff, which is like, I'm going to throw one of my favorite things that you do is you often will show a picture of Babe Ruth, and like you can really see it. I was like, no. See what, Lou? It's like, it's like here, it's right in front of you if you look at it, right? If you open yourself. So, no, I dig it.
Real quick, can I say what's amazing about that is that people understand that, right? So it's like, I don't have to say much. I don't have to explain it. And there's these weird way that we understand race in America, and people understand like, oh, Babe Ruth might have been black, and very few people push back. Like, this is not true. I think it's just kind of given at this point that, he might have been black, or he might have been Dominican, whatever was going on there. It hasn't got to the point where people really want to have a real deep conversation on like baseball or something in the 1920s, but that's what I like to do with primary sources on social media. It's just short and sweet. Like, and that's what we do with our students, right? I'm not saying people are my students here, but this idea that I could put it out there and then you make the interpretation, right? Or since we're historians at the movie, as Snoop Dogg said in Starsky and Hutch, is I lay it out so you could play it out, right? Right, like that, and that's how I operate with primary sources.
No, I want to ask you about this film. I asked you early on, it's like, hey, you want to do Any Given Sunday? You're like, absolutely. And this is we scheduled this a while back, and
Like
then
June, July. Yeah.
well,
You're on
I
your
wanted to
stuff.
get well, I knew the book was coming out, right, and I wanted to time this. This is going to come out the week that your book drops. I
Nice.
think your book drops on the 24th, if I recall
Right. Right.
correctly, and we'll drop on the 26th, I think, and you know I had to go back and rewatch this movie. And I'd seen this movie before once, some other time, so forth, or earlier. And I went back and rewatched it again a couple days ago. So I was kind of wondering, what were your general impressions of Any Given Sunday? You were obviously familiar with the film. I'm guessing you'd seen it before. You went back and did a rewatch. What are your thoughts when you go back and look at this movie? This Oliver Stone film. You got Al Pacino. You got a really young Jamie Foxx, who was really pre Jamie Foxx. Like, what are your thoughts on this movie?
Yeah, so Jamie was still like, I don't think he had made it big yet, right? Where Ray hadn't hit or anything like that. And he was still probably known for, I think the Jamie Foxx show might have been out, and then Living Color, like that Wanda character and stuff like that. But, it's almost, I think it's the 25th year anniversary this year of that movie. Yeah. And one of the things I was thinking, the first thing I was thinking is like, I'm glad my kids aren't around when I'm watching it. Because when I was, young, when that came out, young 20s, 21, I was 21, right? I wasn't thinking about none of that. And then all of a sudden I'm watching this like, oh, let me stop this right here because this part's not going to be appropriate. No. But I think I like it just because, it talks about a subject I'm familiar with. But then all the other little stuff that doesn't get played out, like Cameron Diaz trying to parlay moving a stadium. And this is what we see all the time constantly with pro sports is trying to act like you're going to move so you get a brand new stadium from the public, right? And so now you talk about public financing. You got issues with drugs, not just drugs like recreational drugs. I wouldn't, consider cocaine a recreational drug, but like painkillers and CTE before CTE, like Lawrence Taylor's character is about to be done, right? And then you have the whole racial dynamics at quarterback in the sports. And then you have like the silly side stuff. Like to me, one of the things I think about is LL Cool J's character, right? He plays a running back. And I'm like, the game has changed so much. People really don't care about the personality of the running back. But at that time, like it plays into this kind of very hip hop racial stereotypes of this running back who only cares, the black running back who only cares about himself, right? And I was like, we don't even see running backs like that anymore because the game, the Any Given Sunday part, the game has really got rid of them because so there's this idea in sports that you don't pay a running back after a certain age and because you don't get a return on your investment anymore. And so the game is just like, oh, we'll just, we'll use them for 4 or 5 years unless they're super duper elite. And then after that, we're just bringing in the new one. Whereas when that movie came out, that position is still relevant, right? And I think that's one of the major changes I saw. It's like you couldn't make a movie nowadays, right? It's the same thing when we watch, here we go, Historians at the Movie, Friday Night Lights. Like that Boobie Miles character makes sense to a lot of people because that's how we saw like these kind of black running backs. And now we don't really see that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, this movie for me watching back, I was like, it's incredibly prescient. It feels like maybe a bit too long in the teeth as far as runtime goes, a little bit.
Pretty long, yeah.
Oliver Stone is definitely having some fun with this movie, but like this thing hits so much stuff on the head, Lou. When we're talking about the race stuff, the CTE. The drug, like you're saying, not the cocaine and party stuff because that's just Miami. We could do a story. We've done enough. We've done enough pods on Miami by now. But like the whole storyline between Matthew Modine and James Woods playing that icky doctor, just nailing all this stuff. And there's a bit of like, did you ever see The Program?
Oh, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
There's some of that. And I think some of the guys are from The Program were in this film too. The linebacker.
The Vladimir was in it, I think, right?
Yeah.
The guy who gets loaded up and like crashes everything? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now he's the guy on the motorcycle with the hat, and so forth, right? I recognize him. But so much of this, I was like, holy cow. there's no wonder why the NFL wanted nothing to do with this movie, right?
Right. And to me, the main aspect for them on that, it's not necessarily the race stuff because the NFL had been dealing with that. And they actually had a pretty good draft that year. We can get into the 1999 draft as far as black quarterbacks, but a lot of it is the drug stuff, right? And I think another historians at the movies, North Dallas, I want to say North Dallas 40 is the movie with Nick Nolte playing a football player. I hope you get it right. But that's dealing with drugs too. It's late 1970s, a lot of drugs, a lot of painkillers. And this one, they're dealing with that. And the fact that the doctors are the ones like pushing it, right? Like, and this doctor, spoiler, if you haven't seen this movie 25 years later, right, is messing up the x-rays just so they can get a guy to play. And it's like life or death situation. And he's like, this whole point of like, I'm not going to keep him away from the money. And I think that's what the NFL doesn't want us to see. And there's no way you can make it now because I think they probably even had a problem with that Will Smith, who probably shouldn't have been in that that movie where he plays
the concussion film.
Yeah, the concussion film, right? That's what they don't want us to see. It's how drugs were part of football, and that's the only way some of these guys can actually play, right? And I think the NFL, I don't know if they've made strides, but what they've done is tried to make the game seem safer. And so, like, for instance, you have people wearing different caps now, different type of helmets in the game that to protect them from concussions. They've suspended folks over drugs. I think New Orleans Saints, I want to say they got suspended over like kind of their drug. Like they had them like just out there like it was candy. So they could pop those painkillers and stuff like that. And so the NFL has had to deal with these. And they did the same thing. ESPN had a show about football, and the NFL wasn't very supportive of it either. So they really try to protect their brand, even though their brand is very violent, right? We watch a lot of football in this country because we like the violence in it. And so they're just trying to protect the fact that these guys have to go through a lot of stuff that's going to impact them later, like the drugs or acting like you don't have a concussion.
Did you ever play football at any level?
I was the best way. Let's do a movie reference. Necessary Roughness. Did you see that one?
Yeah.
So I was
it's Major League for football.
Yeah, I was the receiver for Necessary Roughness, right? Like, so, senior year in high school, I played. I was not like I couldn't catch. I would just beat them deep, but we didn't throw actually, and so it was like the worst. They promised a lot, like, oh, we're going to throw it and this and that. And I had no clue. And then we ran 98% of the time. And I'm just sitting there blocking. And like, this is just as awful. I want to get back to basketball. But, the good part about it is, you really make friends, lifetime friends, the two-a-day stuff. And the same stuff we teach about sports and sports history. Just the idea about discipline and toughness and just kind of putting your body through it. Now, it was the mid 90s. So, water makes you weak. It's 100 degree days probably wasn't safe. Like my kid's cross country practice got canceled last week because it was like high 80s. And we're sitting there practicing in the hundreds. You know what I mean? Like it's just a different era. But I did play. Yeah.
I get people ask me a lot, fairly often, like, what position do you play? And I'm like, trombone. So,
Wow, yeah, you're a big guy. You're a big guy. Now, did you lift weights in high school, or did you start lifting afterwards?
No, man, I started lifting after my divorce. Actually, okay. I didn't pick up a weight until I found out that I was going to be, on my own for a little while, and then that was like quite literally like I found like sport and all that kind of stuff actually to be that. That version of like escape. And I was going, as an older guy, going through graduate school, stuff like that, stipends don't pay a lot. You don't have a lot of money to do stuff. So I could go to the gym at the University of Minnesota, and that's what I would do for like 2 hours a day, every day, because I didn't have to think about history or relationships or anything else like that. For 2 hours a day, I could escape in the gym. And that's just, that's what I was doing. I was fortunate in that the University of Minnesota was in a pissing match with the University of Michigan over who could have like the nicer student facilities. So we had really, really good stuff there. But no, I have no athleticism, Lou. I'm awful. I can just get in the way. All right, I want to ask you. I want to kind of jump into this thing. So much of this revolves, I guess Pacino's kind of carrying this film in a lot of ways, but I guess the one B story. It's Willie Beeman and this idea. There's so much of this talking about how Beeman's on the rise. He's actually the third string quarterback coming into this film, and ends up replacing Dennis Quaid and so forth. And he's really good, right? And it's just like kind of comes out of nowhere. And the argument's like, no, I've always been good, but you guys wouldn't allow me to be good. So I guess what I want to talk about now is like this film comes out in '99. Seems like it's kind of ahead of its time. We've obviously already had big quarterbacks in the league by the point in time. You talk about Doug Williams, Warren Moon is the guy, Randall Cunningham obviously is the guy. Like as you and I kind of got older and stuff like that. Can we talk about this evolution of the black quarterback and like the resistance to having a black quarterback? Like the whole point of your book here. Like where does this come from?
So like you said, we can get into Beeman's character in a bit because I think it like speaks to a lot of it. But so the resistance to the black quarterback, chapter 1, everybody. So what I try to do with this book is like, so it's a narrative, right, of two guys' lives, as you said, Doug Williams and Vince Evans, both born in 1955, both born in the South, right? So this is 1955, the South. This is post Brown. Right. And so the South is trying to figure out, and the way I want people to think about this book is like, this is a book about civil rights, right? Post civil rights. Like what happens if merit is truly going to matter? And the quarterback for a lot of people becomes the measuring stick for that because it's the most visible position, right? He is the most important athlete in America, right? The quarterback, the professional quarterback. So to have a black one means a lot because it means you're smart. You're a leader. People look up to you. You're a hard worker. All these great qualities we celebrate. And so by denying that, you're saying black folks don't fit into that box. And so when did it become that? When I talk about it in the book, like right off the bat, chapter 1, it's 1940 when the position changed. And so for folks who don't know, up until 1940, the majority of the offense is what you call a single wing. You're not going to see a single wing offense in high school anymore. If you do, that coach is very, very old. He's quite undersized, and he's just like, we're just going to run it every time because we're a small school. But it's a running offense. The best way to think about it is like when the NFL went Wildcat and you're snapping it back to your best athlete and they're going. And then in 1940, the T formation becomes popular again. I won't go into the history of the T formation, but just know that what happens is they start to send a guy in motion on offense, and that way you can read the defense a little bit better. And now they're going to start to pass. And once they start to pass more, precision becomes important. Learning a playbook becomes important, right? You got to know the 400 plays you have. The quarterback has to know what every receiver is going to do. So you're going from one receiver and a tight end and a running back to two receivers and a tight end and to three receivers, right? You got to know blocking schemes. And that happens in the 1940s, and the T formation goes from like a few teams running it, like Chicago Bears and Stanford Cardinals. They weren't the Cardinals at that time. In 1940, running it to 90% of teams, college pros, running it by the mid 1940s. Every pro team is running a system like that by the early 1950s. And that's when the quarterback becomes important. And this is at the same time where Americans are like, if you follow stuff about like World War II or even athletics with Jesse Owens saying that, black people are all brawn and no brain. And now this position has become the most important position in America. And the question becomes, well, is a black person going to be able to play it? Because there are certainly black quarterbacks at the college level, especially at the black college level. And so this book is really by looking at Doug and Vince, but also taking a glimpse at how that position changes, how people fight for that, is really talking about that stuff, about racism. One of the lines I say is like, look, the NFL before you had the black quarterback, it's like up until late 1960s, it looks as if Bull Connor was forced to pick a team, right? And that is to say every position down the middle of the field was white because those are thinking positions. And the people who were thought to have speed black athletes, running back, wide receiver, defensive backs were black. And so Willie Beeman's talking about that, right? If I get it right, he went to the University of Houston and he was like, I've been at 5 teams and this coach wanted me to be a DB because I had quick feet. Every black guy who played from 1955, so 55 was the year that Charlie Choo-Choo Brackens played like a couple snaps with the Green Bay Packers until 1968 when Marlon Briscoe, who was a college quarterback and then switched to DB and then got to be a quarterback for 9 games, they all got switched and the majority of them were switched to DBs just for the fact that they thought, well, you're fast. Like there's no such thing as a third string black quarterback. They're not even wasting that time on you at that time. And so Beeman being able to be there at third string was kind of important, right? This idea that he hangs around. So he has talent. It's just that nobody's willing to tap into that talent because what happens is NFL coaches are so stuck in their way. And they don't want to accept anything. Like, so to me, it means something that Beeman comes from Houston. Houston as a college, like in real life, starting in the late 1960s, early 1970s, is starting black quarterbacks. So they have a guy like in the early 1970s, DC Nobles, who is one of the top quarterbacks in the nation, regardless of race, doesn't even get a sniff at the league. But what's happening with a lot of colleges, I don't explain this enough in the book that you receive before the edits. I spent a lot of time on this, but colleges, once integration starts to come, it's a weird thing. It doesn't happen on purpose, but it just happens at the same time, is that college football changes and they have these variations of offense. So instead of like having like pass heavy offense, they start to say, you know what, here's the veer, here's the wishbone, here's the triple option. Here are these offenses where we need an athletic quarterback who doesn't have to throw, but can throw deep and kind of mirrors what they would do with a single wing. And so they're going to start to, who's the athlete? It's the black guy, right? And so even in 1974, Tennessee has a starting black quarterback, Condrez Holloway. Florida has a starting black quarterback. There's like 8 starting black quarterbacks in what we call the Big Ten, right? There's 2, Vince Evans will be part of the big Pac-8, but they're all over. They're just not getting a shot in the NFL because every coach is like Al Pacino's character, stuck in their ways. And so what's important about what Oliver Stone's doing with that character is that he has to change because the game is changing. People want to see that. And I make that point, I think, within the first 2 or 3 pages. Like this, I use this Ford commercial from 1979. So I explained that it's like the second paragraph, right? Where I'm literally watching this game on YouTube. And then once it gets to this part, they switch to this Ford commercial and Ford is pumping like hybrid cars, which I didn't know existed back then, all this stuff. And I'm like, this is what is happening with NFL, but they don't know it, right? The game is changing. The change is the black quarterback. And so that's what they're trying to do with Any Given Sunday. This is what I'm trying to explain the history of with the book, like Vince Evans and Doug Williams. So Vince is like very Willie Beeman-esque, minus all the other stuff that Willie Beeman represents. But Vince is 6'2", he's a 4.5 40 guy, and he's third string for about a year and a half. They want to switch him to receiver. Like he's the 6th round pick. But if he told the NFL that he'd play a different position, it was thought that he's either 1st or 2nd round pick. But he sticks to his guns, just like Willie Beeman. And those characters are so important because those guys get cut. Like, oh, you won't play DB, you're out, or you're going to Canada. So to me, like Willie Beeman's character, like perfectly syncs with what's going on in the book.
Lou, I have so many questions coming off of that, actually. So if you will, can you talk a little bit about the concept of stacking? Because you talk about this early in the book, and I think it helps to explain the way that people are kind of positioning men in their heads.
Yeah, so stacking in sports is this idea that you're putting people in positions based on race and based on these kind of racial stereotypes. So black athletes would get stacked in like as a DBs or wide receivers. And today, like if we want to even talk about not reverse racism, but the kind of reverse stacking is you rarely see like a white running back, right? Christian McCaffrey, who plays for San Francisco, was the first white running back drafted in the first round in like 40 years, right? And usually what happens with white guys is they're told, you're not playing DB. So this year is a big deal because I think there's 3 for the first time in a long time playing defensive backs. One was drafted. I want to say the Eagles drafted him in the first or second round, which is very rare. So like, for example, when 1968, Eldridge Dickey, who played for Tennessee State, he's the first black quarterback drafted in the first round. By the Raiders, they'll promptly switch him to receiver. But Al Davis makes the point that, like, look, I only have one. There's only one white DB in the AFL, right? And I got him on my team, right? So there's only one white DB because they're like already early on. You're not playing this, right? But you can play middle linebacker. You're just not playing these other positions here. So that's kind of how stacking works. If you're a baseball fan, it's black guys don't really get a chance to play catcher. I don't think there's an African American catcher. Maybe like there might be Afro, like Dominican or something like that, but African American catcher. Generally, you're put into the outfield where you can use your speed rather early in their careers. Very few pitchers. There's probably a handful, probably less than 10 black starting pitchers. I'd have to check. African American starting pitchers. It's just, and that's just how it works in all of these sports.
We see Dennis Quaid as not the prime picture of mobility in this film, right? And that got me thinking about, growing up in the 80s. I'm 47, so like I remember the first quarterback I think I ever really recall was was actually with the Bears, right? It was in that 80, it was in that 85 season, and it seems to me, Lou, like there was almost this idea that white quarterbacks were not supposed to. There was almost like this odd pride aspect. It's like white quarterbacks can't run; they're slow, and then they have to throw the ball, right? And they're leaders of men and all this kind of stuff, right? Then you had guys like Randall Cunningham who could run, right? And then later on you got Mike Vick and these other guys. I wonder, did you, when you're looking back and seeing this stuff, was there actual were there negative stereotypes towards like white guys who were athletic at times and things like that, like white guys who played like these really hyper athletic guys like Evans and so forth? Did we, like, you're not playing like the white guys should play, you're not slow, you're not so forth? Did you see that too?
Yeah. So the quarterback in the late 70s who retires as leading passer in the NFL history is Fran Tarkenton. And Fran is a scrambler. He's not a scrambler, like scrambler how to get the third. Like I talk about this in one of those chapters when I'm dealing with Vince Evans getting drafted, because he's really the first black quarterback who could run that gets drafted. And so the idea is that you stand in the pocket, and the thought is that the black guy is going to run out the pocket, and it messes up the timing of everything. And he runs out because he doesn't have the courage. Like, you have to stand there because these guys are coming. And this is like we're going to protect you era of football, and they're going to slam you to the ground. And I think a lot of the belief was they're just not going to run. And so, I mean, they're not going to stand in the pocket. So Fran, who's a white quarterback, he gets the Vikings. I want to say he gets them to like 4 Super Bowls. They never win, but he's like the leading passer, and he rarely gets hurt. And so one of the things that like black commentators make, newspaper writers, is like, you celebrate Fred Tarkenton. Now, he has his like people, shoot him down just like we do any other athlete, but it's not like the black athlete, right? Like you could have, like, the way they thought about it is like, wait a minute, this guy is one of the best players in the league. And we have guys who are faster than him, who could throw farther than him, and we're not getting a chance. Like, there's something wrong here. So Fran becomes, for me, this important figure. I wish I could have wrote about more, but just the way editing works. So I put him in this chapter. Originally, it's like this chapter with all Marlon Briscoe, but it just didn't work for the narrative. And so that stuff is slid to a chapter about when Vince Evans drafted, like, what do you do with speed? And one of the things we talk about is kind of the scrambler. And the scrambler is somebody who's just running around. Whereas, just running to running. And what these black athletes would say is like, I'm not running to running. I'm moving to create opportunities, right? Like Marlon Briscoe, if listeners don't know, was the first black quarterback to start. And this is 1968. And he's small. He's about 5'10", which is small for a quarterback. And he's like, this gives me better passing lanes. Now we're into this point where we understand that a little bit. But to today, if you watch football, like someone like Bryce Young, who plays for the Carolina Panthers, is small. And the talk is always about those kind of passing lanes that quarterbacks has. Whereas the athletic quarterback, the athletic black quarterback, is moving around to create passing lanes, to buy himself time, to like, well, why would I take a 10-yard sack, right? The white, the mobile guy takes the 10-yard sack, right? That's what happens to Dennis Quaid's character. Willie Beeman gets out of that sack and maybe makes something happen. And the NFL for the longest, like, we don't like that. Like, this is not what we want to do here. So that's when we talk about running and we talk about scrambling. It's in there. And the guys, like I said it before, Vince is the first one with speed to actually get a chance. That's why he's so important to this book, because he's pre-Randall. Now Randall's 6'4", running a 4.5 so it's a little bit different, but he's pre-Randall, he's pre-Vic, all these other guys, the people before him. We're not going to count Marlon, because Marlon, I don't want to be rude, but he's a college quarterback, gets switched to DV, gets to play quarterback for 9 games, and then they switch him to receiver. But the other guys, James Harris, 6'4", Grambling, didn't run, even though he could. Joe Gillum played at Tennessee State, didn't run. And some of these other guys didn't. Doug Williams, who was second fastest in the league, doesn't really run unless he has to. He'll pick up running touchdowns. And in fact, Doug, what I try to explain in the book is Doug goes to Grambling. James Harris goes to Grambling. Their coach, Eddie Robinson, one of the greatest college coaches ever, in the mid-1960s, makes this point that says, look, I'm going to get me a professional black quarterback. And one of the things he emphasizes is don't run. Because the moment they see you run, they're going to have visions of another position. And one of his best guys, this guy's named Matthew Reed, talk about him a little bit, like a paragraph. I had a lot more, but you had to cut that stuff down. And he's 6'4", a 4.40 guy, great arm. The problem is he runs the 40 his best, and he runs a 4.4. And the moment that happens, teams like, oh yeah, you're not playing quarterback. You're a tight end. We'll use this speed somewhere else. Some guys just ran slow on purpose, or wouldn't run at all, so the NFL wouldn't switch them.
Wow. I want to ask you this about Beeman. We see this in the film early on. It's talking about, like, you can't control him. He's making up his own plays. He won't listen to people, things like that. You know, his inventiveness on the field is seen as an absolute negative. I think now maybe it's a little bit different. We look at a guy like Pat Mahomes, we're just like, this guy's a genius. You talk about creating passing lanes. I don't even know that you could call what he does as a lane where he can the sorcery that man can put on a ball. But I'm wondering, was there a pushback to this idea of these like super cerebral guys who could create stuff, and this idea like we can't control the black quarterback? I mean, I wonder is because one of the things we talk about over and over again is like, where are the black coaches?
Yeah.
All the people who are saying, do this play, are white. They're all white men, whether they're owners or coaches or whatever. So I'm wondering, was there a sense, Lou, of like, these guys are out of control, we can't control them kind of thing because of this? Like, people are afraid of this? I mean, am I reading too deeply into this idea?
Yeah, so I would say this. So the one thing about the quarterback that moves, the idea was like once he moves, everything gets thrown out of whack, right? Because the offensive linemen got to know where they're going to be.
It's chaos.
The receivers got to know where they're going to be. But at the same time, when you read it, the receivers are like, yeah, I get it. Like, this makes it better. Like, I can know, like, right? And nowadays, we're past that, and now we just call it off-platform, right? Like, the platform is, like, you take your 5-step drop, your 7-step drop, you get the ball out. Off-platform is the Patrick Mahomes stuff. You roll out, and so, like, if your listeners watch, like, someone like Caleb Williams, they said, well, he's great off-platform. So he's the number one pick for the Bears this year. And that means so the pocket's here, he could throw over there. And that's the evolution of the position of the black quarterback. But instead of saying that, we just call it off platform, right? So if you watch Any Given Sunday, Beeman was at his best when he was off platform, or what they would call it then, instead of saying scrambling, roll out, right? And so what we know is that you can design a rollout play where the quarterback leaves the pocket, the offensive lineman will continue to block for that pocket. And that's what a lot of people say, look, well, why don't you just have them roll out more? And so at the college ranks, they would. At the pro ranks, they're just stuck in their ways, right? So it's not like, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden you become undisciplined. I can't coach you. You're not going to follow these plays. And you're not going to follow these plays. You're not going to know these plays. So even Willie's going through that kind of dumb black quarterback where he doesn't know the plays, and his defense is like, I just haven't had the opportunity. Right. And so Vince Evans is so important to this because Vince was that guy. Like Al Pacino's talking to Willie Beeman. Again, we're spoiling the movie. Like first when he gets in the game, he's like,
go watch the movie if you haven't seen this already.
Go watch the movie. Pay the $4. But he's like, imagine you're on the streets playing. But that's just how he talks to him, right? You're a street quarterback. And so he has this kind of street mentality, but it winds up being brilliant, right? Because when that quarterback leaves the pocket, the defense has to react. And I think nowadays they're teams, the innovative people, and this is what I kind of get at in the book, see that as a plus. Like, oh, I can also have my guy run, or I can create chaos in the defense by moving him a little bit. But the coach and the quarterback have to be in sync when you do that, right? You just can't plug somebody in there into a traditional offense like that if the coach isn't willing to build around that. And so part of the stuff I try to talk about with Vince is the Bears trying to figure that out. Can they actually do that, right? Can they actually build a run around what we call nowadays a dual threat quarterback? And that's where a lot of the league is going. Dual threat. Even someone like Mahomes, who we don't see him fast. He's not fast, but when he runs, you better be ready because he'll take off and he'll get you 20, 30 yards. Or the key dual threat today is like a Lamar Jackson, right? Who's he's probably like 6'3", runs a 4.40 and just can take off. And, as a fantasy manager, got me like 200 yards throwing, 100 yards running. So.
I want to ask you about, say, Vince Evans. And I want to ask, like, Beeman is loved by the fans. Like we see this, once he erupts, right? The fans immediately embrace him. Do guys like Evans, these other early guys, are they embraced by the fans, or are they having to overcome or is there an anti fan backlash for them because they're the black quarterback, or how are they being related to?
So the most interesting thing to me, and it happens to this day, look, in general, the favorite player in a city of sports team is the backup quarterback, right? Because you're never satisfied. Unless you have a great quarterback, you're never satisfied with it, right? So regardless of rate. But I think what you'll see with Evans and other black quarterbacks like Willie Beeman, right, is the fans, when they're on the bench and the white guy is struggling, the fans want them because they are exciting, right? And I think Any Given Sunday does a good job of pointing to that. Like Cameron Diaz's characters, like this puts people in the seats. So they want him. Like people wanted Vince Evans to play. So his rookie year is 1977. His second year, he first gets in the game in 1978 because he's like, they want to see what newness is like. They want to see what 4-4-5 is like, and no one has it. And it's exciting. And when they do well, there's nothing more exciting in the NFL when you have this young, hot black quarterback just tearing up the league. So if you think about when Lamar has this MVP year, his second year, that was fun. Or when Cam Newton was doing his thing when 2015 or something, I think they go like 15-1. That's fun. Or seeing Michael Vick. The flip side is when you start missing, when you're not winning, and then it's like, oh, this is a problem. So if we watch the Chicago Bears last year, it's Justin Fields, right? Now they replace him with a black quarterback, but there's this white guy on the bench, and I want that, right? He's going to stay in the pocket. He's going to make all the throws. He's going to read the defense. I'm tired of the runner. Get him out of here. And that happens like all the time, right? So unless you have nothing but black quarterbacks on your roster, right? So if you have a black and a white guy on your roster, you're going to deal with that. And early on, the NFL teams, as I point out, I want to say like chapter 3, make these conscious decisions in the 1960s, 70s to not deal with that, right? They're like, look, there's a civil rights movement. There's a black power movement going on. We're not having any of this black quarterback on the bench stuff and then dealing with black fans. And so I go through some of these cases, case by case basis, but I also know that once the black guy does bad or there's a white guy waiting in the wings, it's like, oh, get him out of here. It's hate mail. It's death threats. And so guys like James Harris, Joe Gilliam, who was the starting quarterback for Pittsburgh in the '74 season for the first six games. He goes 4-1-1, and they just put Terry Bradshaw back in. Like, he beats Terry Bradshaw out legitimately, goes on his feet in the preseason, goes 4-1-1 in the first 6 games, and he's gone. And he gets over, even while he's starting, he's 4-1-1. He gets over 100 pieces of hate mail just in that span. And eventually, like, he turns to drugs, like, to cope. I think part of it is to cope with the stress, cope with the body punishment he goes through. He's a slight guy at 6'3". He's a string bean. And he'll die later on of a drug overdose, like, 25 years later. But I don't think Joe Gilliam ever gets over what happened to him, the racism that he faced, what his family's had to face, simply because there's a white backup.
You brought up the 99 draft earlier. This film takes place comes out in 99, 25 years ago. What's going on in the draft? You talked a little bit about the quarterbacks coming out that year. Was something different in the air at this time of year? I mean, this movie comes out at this point in time. So what's happening? Yeah,
so for the 99, and I don't know if they do it, like, they don't make note of it, right? Because the movie comes out in December. They probably worked on it. But the black quarterback's coming. And so we see that we've already had, like, the star Randall. And I think if I were to point to any quarterback before that movie coming out, who would Willie Beamen probably be? Most likely would be like a version of Randall Cunningham, who was a star and was a mega superstar. And that does take over for a white quarterback, a veteran, and Ron Jaworski, who we call Jaws, right? In Philadelphia in the mid 1980s. But the 99 draft just is a signal that there's changes, right? And so if you watch, like, the evolution of the draft of the black quarterback, you have, Eldridge Dickey's the first round pick in '68. I think he's like 25th pick by the Raiders. He switched to receiver. And then you wait for a whole decade for Doug Williams to be the first round pick. And then you have to wait 89, I think, 90 for Andre Ware. He's going to win the Heisman. He's going to be an early round pick. He'll go to
Miami,
Detroit Lions. He'll go to Detroit. Like, Miami, okay. The black quarterbacks that Miami have had are like a handful, like I didn't say Chet. I was about to say Chet Lemon, but he played for the Tigers. Like, very, like, 3 or 4, like Ray Lucas, I think Chet something, Dante Culpepper, and they did pick up Pat White in the second round. That didn't work out. But very, very few. But anyway, and then you have Steve McNair, who's a first round pick. So he's the highest pick for a black quarterback. He's the third pick. And then you have the 99 draft. And that draft is 3 black quarterbacks in the first round, 5 total. So it's McNabb will go 2, Achilles Smith will go 3, and then Dante Culpepper, I want to say, goes 11 to the Minnesota Vikings. And this just feels different. Like, you have, like, outlets like Evan E. writing about it and other folks writing about it, like, oh my gosh, racism is dead. The NFL has certainly changed because 3 black quarterbacks. The other black quarterback that makes it is Sean. The other black quarterback is Sean King. Not that Sean King, but there's actually a black quarterback named Sean King. He goes to Tampa Bay. And I think Michael Bishop, who's an electrifying college quarterback, gets drafted, but he switched pretty early on. But it felt different. And then, like, I want to say 2 years later, Vic is the number 1 overall pick. And now, since then, we've become comfortable with number 1 overalls. The last 2 years, each draft, black quarterbacks have gone first and second. So last year was Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud. And then Anthony Richardson went 4th. This year, it was Caleb Williams, Jalen Daniels going 1, 2, and then Penix was in the top 10. So we're getting to that point where it's normal to have black quarterbacks picked early in the draft.
Did this movie forecast names, images, and likeness? Like, because Beeman's talking about that, right? So because I read Rex Chapman's book recently. Rex, obviously from Kentucky, he's one of my guys, right? And he's talking about, like, everybody in Kentucky was getting paid, or like everybody was getting paid in college, at the big programs. Willie talks about this. He's in Houston and so forth, and he doesn't take much. He's like, I think, get some clothes or something like that. I can't recall.
Yeah,
but they're talking about this. Are they forecasting? NIL at some point in time, or no?
No, I think everybody knew these guys were getting paid, and it was just a sham, right? Like, the sham is that these guys can't get money. And I think Beeman and a lot of these guys don't really make the case. That's the power of like Ed O'Bannon, who sues the NCAA
Change the game.
and the Fab Five in real time, kind of talking about it. Like someone like a Johnny Manziel, who should have like when he was in college. Now he didn't pan out in the pros, but he was making a lot of money. In I think the next Netflix special that he had just talked about it, where they just lied and said, well, his family comes from oil money. And I think because they were white, people are like, you know what, this probably makes sense. Like they just flat out lied that says, and he was getting paid like thousands of thousands. But if you think about it, he could have stopped and said, you know what, we're going to fight this. We're going to fight for this. Beeman, happens whatever college player went through is that he got paid and somehow they found out and then he lost eligibility. But now you're right. Like there wasn't in that movie a push. It was just like, bad. Like Al Pacino's character didn't say, this is messed up. These guys should be getting paid. I think the same thing happens a little bit in Blue Chips, with Shaq and Nick Nolte and Penny Hardaway's in it where the reason why he gets them is because I think Shaq gets a Lambo. He doesn't want it. Penny Hardaway's mom gets a house. Ryan Evans, who's the white basketball player, dad gets a tractor. That's where we're at now, right? That's where we're at there now, but everything's above board. And it's just like you said earlier about Michigan and Minnesota building up gymnasiums. It's just an arms race, like how much money we could pump in over the top, right? Where everybody knows where you're signing these kind of car dealerships, something like Raising Cane's or just straight up cash.
Does the NFL want to talk about CTE in 1999?
No CTE, no drug use, right? Because that would admit that there's something wrong, and they still struggle today. So they're probably gonna be upset at you that you asked that question.
They can buy me off, Lou. That's fine. I will shut this whole thing down. All they have to do is write a check. I am absolutely corruptible.
Yeah, I know. No, but I don't even think if they knew what it was, they weren't willing to admit it back then. Like we knew it existed. We just call it punch drunk, right? Like we as boxers, and I think that Jim Brown's character actually mentions it in that movie to Lawrence Taylor. Like you don't want to be walking around the punch drunk and forgetting who you are. Now we just thought it was boxers, and then the other problem is, I think society was perfectly willing for the longest time to accept it that this happens to these working class guys who risk their body, right? And I don't think there are people like, this is so sad. Poor boxers who've been hit in the head. You know what I mean? Like let's change these rules around that. Let's change football around. Like I think a lot of people think you risked your body, you made the money, and this is what happens. And I think also there's not like major conversations out there, like in real time about the risk of football. Like we see it like maybe this guy hurts his knees to walk, his backs to walk, but very rarely do we talk about that brain. And I think that I want to say it was Jim Brown talking to Lawrence Taylor or something like that, trying to make the point, like, it's not worth it to go out there and play. At the end of the day, spoiler, Lawrence Taylor plays and gets his bonus, but he's jacked up for life, right? You just figure he's going to be jacked up. Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like I saw JJ Watt talking today. The new hats are out there now with the padding and stuff like that, and I'm wondering, the hats I guess are supposed to be shown to be even better towards protecting against concussions and stuff like that. The guys is this a masculinity thing where there's a hesitancy to embrace these new big? I mean, those hats are huge.
Yeah. I think it's going to take, so one of the best running backs, I think Jonathan Taylor wore it or said he was going to wear it. I think it's going to take a superstar to wear it. But you're right. Like, I think a lot of the guys who get in it say this, I know the risk, right? Now, you say that when you're 22, you're not going to say that when you're 39, right? 40. Because even as somebody who barely plays sports, my body hurts. Like, I played basketball all summer. And my knees like hurt. And I was like convinced myself like it's just for the summer, semester starts. And young people don't understand that their bodies change and young, we'll call them gladiators. And that's a reference to that movie too, because they do show some like gladiator scenes, not like Russell Crowe gladiators, but some other stuff. They don't understand that either because you do think you're invincible. So like the old guys are the ones who are broke down, but they still play. And they're not telling the young guys, you never once see Dennis Quaid's character or Lawrence Taylor's character, both who I think have like 15 plus years in the league at that time in the movie. Bodies are broken down, ready to die at any time if they get hit. They never tell the young player, hey, don't risk it. It's not worth it. They just keep playing, shoot up, and they keep playing because that's the risk. And I think the whole title, Any Given Sunday, is part of that. Like anything can happen, right? And I think the other thing is the problem is too that you're not in the league very long. So the majority of guys, 2-3 years. And so you have this short time to play a game you love and to make 400, 500,000 a year. And I think people are like, I'm going to risk that for that shot of glory to follow my dreams. I worked so hard, and very, very few people would ever turn something like that down.
Do we get a sense that Matthew Modine's doctor is going to go down the dark path like James Woods towards the end of the film? Because he's got LT, like, it's like, hey, just give me what I need, just hook me up. And I kind of felt like he did he not? I mean,
yeah, they all do, and that's why you have to have they do, right? Because they work for the team, and at the end of the day, they work for the team, and so that's why you have like independent neurologists. I think there's like independent doctors now. I know how you air quote independent, but so when someone gets dinged up, it's not an employee of the team who watches it, but so you just hope that they're in the right state of mind, no pun intended, when they evaluate these guys, because there is a lot of pressure, right? Because if I don't allow this guy to go back, then I get in trouble. Then I'm not working for you. So, and I think that he makes that decision right there. So you're right. Like the moment he shoots up LT, it's over. Like there's no going back.
What are your favorite parts of this movie?
Okay, so it's a very small scene, and only because it relates to my book. The black mayor who has an interesting role, and I think, it's 90s. It's the time when sports franchises are being built and black mayors have decisions to make in all these cities. But we won't get into public financing and what black mayors have to go through, Detroit. But anyway, he tells Willie Beeman, like after his first day, that he's like a hero. And to me, like, that's my book. Like, okay, this is Doug Williams. This is the meaning of the black quarterback. Like, here's the mayor, right? And the mayor of Miami. The leader. So he's one of the most important political figures. He's black mayor of a major city, one of the most important figures in this fictional story in America. And he's like, you're a hero to the community because you made it and you're the quarterback, right? You're not telling LT's character who's a linebacker. You're not telling, Bill Bellamy, who's a comedian receiver in the movie, or LL Cool J's character that they're heroes. It's the black quarterback. And so to me, I was like, that's the point of the book, right? That's why this means something. Other than that, it's, I wouldn't say like, what's that? Saved by the Bell. Seeing, that was my favorite show. And so you're like, wait a minute, that's a girl from Saved by the Bell.
Yeah.
It just went the wrong direction with her characters. Saved by the Bell was like the perfect show. Sorry, listeners. But I like that point. I thought some of the dance scenes were pretty cool, like the celebrations, and I think you would see that later on in the NFL.
The grenade.
The grenade was awesome.
It really was a grenade.
But yeah, it was, like you said, it was long. It was kind of long. They didn't have to do a lot of the I would say Jesse Spanos. That's not her name. The Jesse Spanos, Al Pacino scenes. They didn't have to do a lot of that stuff. Like they didn't need that. Some of the party scenes at like the mansion and stuff like that. They could have really cut this movie out. But it's pretty good for what it needed to do.
Yeah, this film almost focuses on Pacino too much because I feel like there's actually a better movie that's focused more on Beeman,
right,
than Pacino, right?
Right. Well, Pacino is the old white guy, but he's also, I think you have to kind of know. I'm not saying you don't know anything, but I think there's something going on, and Oliver Stone doesn't want to let us in on it, but you have to kind of know a little bit, but because he's Italian American, right, in real life and in that movie, right? And so there is I think there's a point being made without making it that Italian Americans were treated differently And then his dad's like, you have to watch the flashbacks. Like I got
the owners of the team are an Italian or an Italian family.
right,
Cameron
right,
Diaz's family, they're Italian.
and they've assimilated, and
Right.
so they're the new white people. And I think the flashbacks are important, right? His dad dies in World War II, and if we, we talk World War II history, like that's like the time where Italian Americans, the hyphenation momentarily goes away, and for until Rocky comes back and he's the Italian stallion, right? But and then there's that celebration of Vince Lombardi, like the pictures. I think there's a Lombardi quote, but the pictures all the time you see Al Pacino's office is Lombardi. Now, on the one hand, he's the greatest coach ever, but it's important to people that he's Italian American. And I think the flashbacks that Beeman has of when he's playing, he's struggling, and it's these old like white crowd. And so Beeman represents the newness. Al Pacino represents old white, even though he was old. His generation before was old, discriminated white ethnic. Now he's the old white guy. And I think he's wrestling with that. He probably understands that my people were treated a little bit differently too. And he comes to see that this is the right thing to do. Like not only because Willie Beeman helps me win, spoiler, he goes to a new team and he signs him, and it's a way to get
in
back.
Albuquerque. Lou, is that is going from Miami to Albuquerque? Is that really? I've been to Albuquerque.
Look, I wouldn't mind being in the high desert, but not for forever. Like I wouldn't mind visiting. You know what I mean? I don't mind the high desert and stuff like that. If Albuquerque's high desert, but first of all, there's no way that a team would ever go to New Mexico. Like I'm like, how does this even happen? Like, you know what I mean? Like this, the
Vegas is sitting there in 1999. You could have put them there
in 1999, right? And there's just no way, just because the population won't support it. But it's like one of those things in the movie that they don't talk about. At some point, someone leveraged that off, right? You couldn't get two teams in LA. Now you have two teams in LA. Fan base is not really there, which is really weird. But yeah, like I think Pacino's character realizes that playing Beeman is the right thing to do, not only victory wise, but makes him feel good. And like no more flashbacks and stuff like that, and get your life together type deal.
I want to go on the record and say that I do not recognize the Chargers as being a Los Angeles based team. I in my head, every time I see them, they're still in San Diego.
I can't. San Diego Chargers too. Yeah.
It's like the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim.
Right.
If you make this movie now, 25 years later, and it feels amazing to me because 1999 does not feel like 25 years. I remember what I look like in my mind's eye. It's still 1999.
We're old.
What happens if, we're old. What happens if we make this movie now, 2024? What kind of issues are we dealing with now, say versus 25 years?
Nothing changes. Like, okay, so the one issue that changes, you can't have those parties because everyone's got a camera.
Social media, right?
Social media, TMZ, everything. We know literally everything about you. When you go out, somebody will post it. So that doesn't exist. You snorting all that cocaine. I'm not saying these guys don't do it. You doing it at a public party like that. Yeah, we're gonna know about everything, right? But I the painkillers, the drugs, I think still exist, but I think legalizing weed has changed a lot of things. I can't recall what the NFL stance is on that, because it's not like you're in Colorado and it's perfectly legal, but I'm not sure if they follow the federal mandate, right? Whereas I'm not sure if Denver Broncos players can smoke weed to deal with their pain and stuff like that. But there's a lot more conversations about mental health. Right. It's not just like man up type stuff. Right. Let me tell you a story, right, about run through a wall and stuff like that. Now it's like, oh, there's a place for you to talk. Every team has a health professional there. These guys know the risks that they're going through now. They might not have known about CTE and stuff like that, but that's all out in the open. There are these independent doctors there. So I think, that's there. The issue of the black quarterback taking over for the white guy, you can still deal with that, right? Or just the star celebrity black quarterback, and just trying to change the game for that is still, I think, part of part of the conversation I have, even though I think 15 or 16 started on opening weekend, right? None start today. But still, today, the listeners don't know when we're recording this. We're recording this first week of NFL Monday Night Football. Yeah. So whatever the date is,
we're recording this 2 weeks ago. Yeah. Is what we're doing because you're coming out in 2 weeks.
I just ruined it. Everybody thought that until this moment happened that these things were live, no editing, no retakes. But I think that to me, and I had this interesting conversation with my class today. We were talking about gender, and one of the guys was like, we don't think like that anymore. Like this generation, and this generation is not perfect. They got to go through a lot of things, and they've had to go through a lot of things. But they're a little bit open-minded about certain things. I'm not saying there's no bullying, because obviously there's bullying and stuff. They understand other things, but they understand mental health way better than we did, right? They have services on colleges. You often get emails from students about, hey, I'm dealing with mental health and stuff, and more society is open-minded to it, but football and football fans struggle with it. And one great way we talk about the black quarterback here is we look at the Chicago Bears, Caleb Williams, and number one pick, and he paints his fingernails, and he is carrying, people call it's a purse, it's a bag, you know what I mean, a very expensive bag. He cries. He cried last year when he lost the game in his mom's arms. And he's very open about mental health, about having these conversations, about painting stuff on his fingernails about mental health. And there are some people just think that is not going to work in the NFL, right? You can't be that type of, if you're not an alpha male, you can't make it in the NFL. And any given Sunday was all alpha males, like all. And now we have this kind of pushback to that. And I think someone like a Jalen Hurts, I'm not saying he's not alpha male, but he's very quiet. And there's a lot of pushback. Even watching him play, even myself, like, I was his fantasy manager last year, so I really cared about how well he did. It's like when he threw a pick, like, I want you to break a clipboard. But he's like, And some people say, well, he doesn't care, but that's just how he is. That's just how he processes things. Whereas we grew up thinking like, you gotta slam stuff, you gotta yell. I don't know. I think you didn't play high school sports, but we got yelled at every day.
I was a very competitive trombone player, Lou.
Yeah, I don't know. We get yelled at every day, and I don't think you can get away with that as much. Whereas we just like, well, this is just part of it. This is just what happens. You get
making men out of them.
Right. And it's like this 40-year-old man yelling at like 16-year-old kids because they got beat back door or something like that. And you're just like, man, I'm trying to like finish these classes, talk to people, have fun, and you're yelling at me for not denying hard enough, right? So yeah.
No, in fact, now I'm the 47-year-old man yelling at the kids at the gym because they won't get off the bench so I can get my set in. So
yeah, I know. I seen you. You're the type. You're you.
Whatever.
I honestly, like, when I'm at the gym, like, I don't work out as much, lift as much as you, but I realize that if you don't, then everything goes to crap. Like, you'll put on weight, right? Like, so you'll have a beer or two, and then you'll just have this kind of very sedentary lifestyle. And if you don't stay active, the older you get, and then your pants, it just changes up. Your pants don't fit. You got to go buy a new set of pants. So I'm at the gym more often. And one thing I can't stand is like, dude, get off your phone. Like, get in, get your sets in, get your playlists. Like, I'm good if you get a minute. If you don't, you get a minute between reps. That's how I'm good with that. And no conversations, nothing like that. And I like machines. Like, I don't like doing free weights, but and most gyms don't have like open benches. Like, I think the Y I go to has 5. Now we're talking. Sorry, listeners, don't cut this out.
No, don't apologize. No, we're in this.
Have like five.
I want to hear Lou's numbers here. We're gonna go.
We have like 5 benches, like open benches and stuff like that, and they're generally full. Like, if I were to go to the gym right now, I get no chance of doing anything. So I'm
Monday,
very,
dude. Like, you're not doing chest on Monday.
Yeah, you're not doing chest because it's like, nothing. And I like using the machines and stuff too on the chest. Now, I don't do it for the bench, but just so the little contraptions and stuff like that. Sure. And if that's taken up, like, oh my gosh. So if someone's talking and not getting in and out, I don't want to work in with you, right? I have my own set schedule and stuff. I get in and out like 20 minutes. I don't take any breaks. I do opposite. I know this is not get you big. This doesn't get you big and strong, but let's say if I do chest, So I'll do something chest, and right away I'm doing shoulders or back, right? And that's
Sure.
my rest. And I just get in and out like 20 hard minutes, and then I'll do some cardio. Sorry.
I only really get grumpy if people don't rack the weights.
Oh,
Because that's a common courtesy. Like you might have somebody coming in behind you who's not as strong or something like that, or some older lady. Like rack your weights.
45.
Rack your weights, man.
All of them, like not even like the 45s. You like got to take them all off.
All of them, they all come off.
All right,
they all come off because I don't know who's coming behind me.
Okay,
so I just want to make sure do so much weight. Just whatever.
And you do you wipe down? Are you
always?
Do you wipe down before, or are you just going
before and after? I mean, but usually I always after because I don't care what happens to me.
You know, the trip. Now I'm getting you off subject. The trip about COVID when you went back is like for the first time you really started to care about your hands. Like I was like, I'm getting dirty. I'm not a little kid. I'm not gonna start licking my fingers and stuff
like that.
Like
I do the thing with the fingernails.
With
the I like getting in the cracks of the hands
but
when
now
I wash.
I'm good at it. I'm never going to the same gym as you because that's. But just wiping down before and after, just kind of thinking about these things. Yeah, sorry to get you guys off topic. Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Listen to this pod. We're off topic 97% of the time on this pod. This is the most on topic pod we've ever done.
Right.
I want to ask you though, actually, because you brought this up, I wonder, Lou, the thing that's in my head though that hasn't been addressed though is like sexuality in football. I'm talking about homosexuality, like gay men playing football. Is this a thing that we have yet? I mean, we haven't seen this on film to my knowledge. There's a scene, I guess, in the Denzel Washington movie where one of the guys kisses the other guy out of play or something.
Makes a big deal.
Right. But like these are these aren't really. Are these conversations are still waiting to be had, or I wonder about this.
So I think like we're doing movies. What's the movie? Adam Sandler, Prison One. They have a character.
Longest Yard.
Longest Yard. I think the guy winds up being like a cheerleader or something like that. But
right.
There's one open player played for the Raiders. I don't think he's in the league anymore. And then Michael
came out after, right?
Right. And then Michael. So that was like 2 years ago. But Michael Sam, who played
that's right
at Missouri, and this is where you're like, okay, this is a problem because he was like SEC player of the defensive player of the year. That's in any given year. That's first round, second round pick, and I don't think they don't pick him to the 7th round, and just people like, yeah, it's not going to work out.
It's gone.
But I honestly think, like I said, this generation is different, and I think teammates know. Like at Grand Valley, there was an open, I want to say on the football team, player, and I think this generation receives it a lot better. I think social media is awful and makes it worse. And so there's always like people like joke around and like someone like Odell Beckham Jr. So you can see like, well, there's this rumor. Look at him in the hot tub with this other guy, is his teammate, right? And I don't think a lot of people who are fans are just nasty. And I know social media is a hard place to like, read things. But I think the generation who are playing now are better than the generation before, and I think would definitely be okay with that, right? And I think you could do a movie around that, but I don't think, obviously, just the way stats are when people come out after their playing careers, I don't know if a player is going to risk that. Right. Like it's the same thing as players making the decision to play hurt. Right. It's like I get 2-3 years to play this game. I'm not gonna risk that maybe later on. And maybe they don't feel comfortable dealing with the pain. Now, in other sports, it's changed, right? And so like let's say the WNBA is like nobody came out for a long time. And this is the WNBA where people assumed it and nobody would, now it's open, right? And people understand that. And now
embraced.
It's embraced. Now, I don't know, like fandom has changed, and that's a whole different conversation we can have around why people might like Caitlin Clark or Angel Reese or college basketball in general more than like the pros because it's embraced. But there's room there. I think there's room for it in basketball. I think part of it too is that, like I said before, it's just a different generation. And so even if you watch basketball, there's this player from Duke who got drafted by the 76ers. I forget his name. It might be Jared McClain. I don't know. I might be making up his name. But he does all the little TikTok dances. He paints his nails too. I think he got an NIL for like nail polish and stuff like that. And so there's people. I'm not saying anything about his sexuality, and people obviously they question that and stuff like that. And this is a man's game. There's no way you're gonna have that in the locker room. But people, if you're good, you're good, and if you're a good person, you're a good person. And I think this generation understands that a lot better than generations before them.
I have to ask you about Cap.
Yeah.
Because the other thing I kept thinking about is what about politically, socially active men on the field or any other sport, right? Cap has been, Colin Kaepernick has been, he's been part of our conversation now for a decade now. It's
almost, yeah.
And you talked earlier today about reason why sports history is so important and things like that. And you started listing some of the people that you talk about and things like that. Now I see on Facebook and stuff like that. Why sports have to be political now? It's like, well, it's always been political, right? Could we make a film about a guy like Colin Kaepernick? Who, I mean, is there a fear of? Do you think after what happened to him?
Yeah,
clearly there was a pushback by the league to kick this guy out, to keep him out. Was that a signal to other black athletes, other athletes in general? Keep your social activism at home, keep your political activism at home, keep your conscience at home.
Yeah, and it always is, right? This is what happened with John Carlos and Tommy Smith in the 68 Olympics. It happened to Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf with the Denver Nuggets, Craig Hodges with the Chicago Bulls. And they do that for a very important reason, so people don't do it. That's why you do it to Cap, right? Like, because if you don't do it to Cap, then everybody, all these black athletes are going to, in their mind, they're going to protest. We won't have control of them anymore. And so that's why you saw earlier on 2017 season, when more and more athletes are kneeling, here come the owners like Jerry Jones. Oh, we're going to link arms with you. We're going to do these things. We'll start these programs with you. 2020, George Floyd, post George Floyd moment when black players were talking about Black Lives Matter, and even like a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes is doing that. That's when league like Roger Goodell's like, okay, we hear you, we made a mistake, and now you're living in. And again, Tyreek Hill gets arrested. But puts in handcuffs before the game, and now he's asking the question. So on September 8th, right? He's asking the question, what would happen if I wasn't Tyreek Hill, right? And it's like, well, the league just kicked this guy out, right? And so now in 2017, they kicked Kaepernick out, and now the league has to have this conversation because it's a mile away from the stadium, and it wasn't just Tyreek; it was Calais Campbell who gets put in handcuffs, and it doesn't matter if they said he was speeding or whatever. So you don't treat them as like the suspect, and then it's on video of him like getting. Like, I don't know if he's being pushed or he's being kicked and stuff like that. And so now they're dealing with it in real time. So, like, can you make a movie out of it? And so this is, historians at the movies. And I think the closest we got to this was, I say, Higher Learning, the Ice Cube character.
Dying to talk about the film.
Now, he wasn't an athlete, but trying to get Omar Epps to see how like these college athletes are treated. It's very 1990s kind of like talk where it's just, we're just going off the cuff. Like, this is how you treat it. And this is very 1990s. They don't talk like this anymore in 2024. It's like rappers don't do this. Movies aren't made like this. Like, what's his name? Who made that? John Singleton made that movie.
John Singleton.
But the idea of this kind of conscious black athlete and Omar Epps having to deal with that. And who also plays a running back, by the way, in your favorite movie, The Program. So not that he gets to play, I want to say, a basketball player in Love and Basketball. He's running back in The Program. And I've seen too many movies in The Program. And what were we talking about just then?
Be careful, you're going to talk yourself into getting invited back, man, because there's so many movies we can
look, and I hate to spoil it for our listeners. Like, before we came on air, James Earl Jones passed, right? We got the news about that. Yeah. And one of the tweets I had, so this is real time. One of the tweets I had was that he played Jack Johnson in the Great White Hope movie, so early 1970s. He played like a Josh Gibson type, if you know baseball, Negro League baseball, and Bingo Long and the Traveling All Stars. And one of the interesting thing about that movie is like it's the only movie made about the Negro Leagues that I think went to the theaters. And so that was mid 70s. We haven't had a Negro League movie in about 50 years made for the movies. Now, HBO had one that was made for HBO with Blair Underwood and Delroy Lindo, which is really good. It's about kind of when Jackie gets signed. But Bingo Long has Star Wars characters, James Earl Jones and Billy D. Williams in it. And there's Richard Pryor, who wasn't in Star Wars, but what is he? Superman 2, I believe. And then James Earl Jones in
Brewster's Millions.
Huh?
Brewster's Millions. That's a baseball
Brewster's
movie.
Millions,
Brewster's
correct?
Millions.
Yeah. Richard Pryor was a pitcher, a black pitcher of Brewster's Millions. What a fantastic with John Candy as his catcher. And James Earl Jones played a just a average Negro leaguer in The Sandlot. Where he was like, I played with George. And it's like,
George? Oh,
yeah. Go ahead,
smile
do it.
Oh no! But God, man, no. The whole time, you were the one who broke the news to me, and he's been in the back of my mind the whole time we've had this conversation. Lou, nobody's work stands on their own.
Yeah.
Who influences you as a scholar? Like, who's put you on this path to this conversation we've had today? What works have blown your mind? The stuff that's influenced you as you've developed as a historian and a sports fan, and frankly as a man. Like, who's made you you?
Yeah, so I would say like I'll just go to like the historians in my life who really shaped me. And first I'll say my major advisor recently passed a few weeks ago. So Clarence Walker at UC Davis, and Clarence was older. He was a black historian. Very like critical thinking, reading wise, there's nobody better. And so we used to have like just great conversations, and he was kind of into sports, but didn't do sports history, but just, he followed, and just the way he was just very sharp. But the idea that, I'm dating myself here, but in 2003, when I applied to the PhD program at UC Davis, with that Jack Johnson, boxing paper, he saw something in me, right? And something in the fact that you could do something about race in sports. Now, he wanted me to do a more Mike Tyson thing, and that probably, looking back, probably would have been more lucrative. But I wasn't ready for that. Like, writing is just, you have to like write and write and write, and I wouldn't want a Mike Tyson book as my first book, right? Because I just, coming off a dissertation, you're not ready to write anything like that. So it was Clarence who saw that, just believed in me, and never gave up when he could have given up. And as I struggled through like the first couple of years of grad school and just writing and stuff like that. And then Joe Pitti, who was at Sac State, who was one of my professors there, who the same thing, just saw something in me and allowed me to do sports. And then Shirley Moore, who was like my only black professor ever. Historian, did California history, great book on Richmond. If you ever read the book, I think it's Color of Law, and that's the book about redlining. All his stuff is just her stuff. Like we start reading about Richmond, like, oh, that's her stuff. And so it's these historians that have been in my life at these small institutions that's just really believed in me. And so I always try to pay it forward. Like when I see a student who has like just great potential, or if they don't, like if this is what you want to do and you think you continue to work hard, then I'll support you no matter what. I'll write the letter. We'll just, chop it up in my office. We'll talk sports or whatever. So that when it comes to writing, for the book, I won't name anybody because I don't want to leave people out. But I realized for this book, like I had to read a lot more. I had to read about writing. I had to read different types of books, and then you have to do a lot of like reading from real time, reading from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and just to get a feel of how people wrote at that time about sports and stuff like that. And so, like as a writer and a reader, that's where I was at. But when it comes to influences, it's really those historians that just saw something in me, and they didn't have to, right? And there's very few people and with this book, right? Like, and this is where it's got, right? This is with a trade press. And there's very few scholars. We're getting more opportunities to do trade press. But if you look at all the sports books ever that are trade pressed by like black males about sports, it's a handful of people, like ever. Like there's one on Jackie Robinson, there's Howard Bryant, there's a guy at ESPN who wrote a black quarterback book 2 years ago. Like if we're talking about just writing a book and not like, interviews and stuff like that. And so very, 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 Frank Guridi at Columbia has a book on stadiums that just came out like a month, 2 weeks ago. And I don't want to say that's the list, but there's very few who get this opportunity. And it's because of these historians in my life, right? Joe Pitti, Mexican-American, Clarence Walker Black, Shirley Moore Black, the few people of color who said, you know what, this kid, it's good grades. Like when I would go, no knock on Sac State, but when you go to your major professor, they had no clue, not your major professor, the advisor, or whatever, the head of the department. Like I'm a straight A student. You have no clue because you didn't take time to care about that. But these other people, like, this guy, Charles Robert, who did Native American history, right? These guys who are, especially the Sac State people, I know I'm long winded, but who are at teaching schools, who are at R2s, who, you know what I mean? Like busy. You could be in those classes. They're like 90 students and took the time out for me.
No. And that's who we got to be.
Yeah.
We got to be that.
Right.
I got one last question for you, Lou. Is Any Given Sunday a history movie?
Yeah. Hold on. Like I'm like this. I'm so bad at live because my daughter is like texting me in the middle of like I'm going to my friend's house before practice. I'm like, wait a minute, you have basketball practice? Are you missing basketball practice? Like this is about to be a problem. You know what? In the sense that you can use the movie to talk about certain things. Like this is like at this moment in 1999. Like I think they could have done more on the city of Miami and just how public stadiums are financed and politics and stuff like that. But American football is the number one. I know we see baseball as America's pastime, but American football is it, right? It's the game. It is truly a multi-billion-dollar business, and to have a story that gives you the kind of the inside of what the workers go through, the gladiators go through, and how we really don't care about them. And we don't, because look, do you play fantasy football?
Oh yeah.
All right. When your guy gets hurt, not saying you, but when someone's guy gets hurt, the first thing they do is, oh my gosh, like, what am I going to do? Because you imagine like the Jordan Love fantasy managers who watch their quarterback go out. And your first thought is like, who's my backup? Who am I going to get? Right? Like if CMC's calf is hurt tonight, your first thought is not to CMC's well-being. It's like, oh my, that's my number one pick.
What's this do to me? Right. I'm gonna lose this week.
Yeah. And I think that's, that's kind of where we're at with how we see some of this stuff.
Man, Lou, I can't tell you, I was so looking forward to talking to you today, and this has been awesome and amazing. And you've got 3 books out now, so everyone go buy all 3. I'm going to post links to all 3 when we do this.
All 3 of them, yeah, especially this one. I want another shot. Like I want another shot at doing the trade books too. But like, yeah,
are you kidding me? Listen, as fast as you put stuff out, you've probably written half of one book during this conversation.
Yeah, right.
Well, listen, we'll write the James Earl Jones in sports books. Is what we'll do.
Yeah. No, I'm tweeting my way through that. That's a lot easier.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And that's a wrap here at Historians of the Movies podcast. Thank you so very much to our guest, Lou Moore. Lou, that was an awesome conversation. You are an amazing dude. I'm so glad that you're my friend, dude. Thank you so much for being here on this pod. Thank you, of course, to my other great friend, Fletcher Powell, for continuing to produce this show, for making this possible. And, of course, always to you, the team of HATM, if you will. We roll 53 deep here at HATM. Guys, thank you so much for being part of HATM, for continuing to share this podcast. If you want to sponsor the pod, you can do so by going to patreon.com/historians of the movies. Or you can share the pod. Give us a comment, a nice word on Apple or Spotify. So, guys, thank you so much for being here. This was an awesome talk. We've got more coming for you soon. Ciao for now. Bye.